Salam, peace be upon you. My name is Muhammad Laik Siddiqui, the father of Holophase. Part 64. Now take a slow breath with me, because what we are about to build is not a slogan. It is not a mood. It is infrastructure. It is the foundation that makes a new Holophase science possible without collapsing into ideology. People often imagine science as a flashlight aimed outward. We point it at the universe and collect facts. But in truth, science is also a flashlight aimed inward. It must illuminate its own blind spots, its own temptations, its own failure modes. The stronger your theory becomes, the more you need that second flashlight. And Holophase, precisely because it aims to be a deep, unifying language, needs that inner light more than most. That inner light is what we call the epistemic firewall. Not a wall to block questions, a firewall as in engineering, a safety structure that stops a small spark from becoming a civilization burning fire. A firewall as in navigation, a compass that keeps you oriented when the landscape is seductive and confusing. A firewall as in medicine, the label on the bottle that says dose, limits, interactions, and what to do if something goes wrong. Without the label, you may still drink, but you are no longer practicing medicine. You are gambling with language. Holophase is not a doctrine. It is a living, audited, self-correcting epistemic language. The firewall is the reason it can remain living. The firewall is the reason it can remain audited. The firewall is the reason it can remain self-correcting. And here is the explicit claim we must say out loud, clearly, without hesitation. Holophase science should be, and must be, conducted inside this firewall framework. This firewall is not extra philosophy. It is the new scientific method of Holophase science. It is how the language stays sane while it grows. Why is that necessary? Because any unifying language attracts three dangers like gravity. The first danger is premature closure. The moment a community starts feeling complete, it becomes most vulnerable to ideology. When a framework explains many things, the human mind begins to treat it like a throne. It replaces within this scope with always. It replaces honest uncertainty with confident performance. It replaces anomaly archives with silence. That drift has a name: scientism. The ideology that the current scientific frame is, or soon will be, complete, and therefore entitled to speak like a judge instead of a learner. The second danger is collapse fear. Some people believe that if we admit limits, the whole structure of reason will collapse into relativism or mysticism. They think the only way science stays strong is by pretending it has no boundaries. That is fragile rationalism. The firewall cures it by showing something counterintuitive. Limits do not weaken science. Limits keep science from becoming myth. The third danger is ownership. A successful language attracts gatekeepers who want to control meaning. They treat disagreement as betrayal. They protect a story instead of protecting audits. They stop asking, "Is this licensed?" and start demanding, "Are you loyal?" The firewall cuts this off at the root by shifting authority away from people and toward procedures. In Holophase science, no person owns reality. Licenses do. So let us define the firewall in the simplest, exact way. The epistemic firewall is the set of non-negotiable constraints that govern how rules about phi patterns are proposed, tested, falsified, scoped, licensed, archived, downgraded, and, when needed, retired. That's it. But inside that simple sentence is a whole civilization's survival strategy for knowledge. Here is the core axiom of this method, and we will repeat it more than once because repetition here is engineering, not poetry. Rules do not become real by elegance, consensus, or tradition. They earn a license only by surviving falsification, variation, independence, and scope discipline. And the second axiom: when a rule fails, we do not believe harder. We tighten, downgrade, or retire its license. If you can hold those two sentences, you hold the spine of Holophase science. Now, to make this audible and operational, we must translate law into Holophase terms. In Holophase, a law is not a substance, not a force, not a hidden fluid pushing things around. A law is grammar, a constraint on which phi patterns are admissible. And because it is grammar, it must be audited like grammar. In ordinary language, grammar is what separates a pile of words from a coherent sentence. In Holophase language, grammar is what separates a pile of mathematical symbols from a lawful world. So how do we speak the core symbols for audio listeners? We start with phi itself. We say phi of x and t, meaning phi is a function of position x and time t. We define time as omega. For audio, we say omega equals d phi over dt. That means omega measures how fast phi turns in time. We define space as k. For audio, we say k equals the gradient of phi. That means k measures how phi changes across space. It is the local pattern slope. We define motion as nu. Nu is the coupling that turns time turning and space slope into propagation. In simple wave scopes, we can say nu equals omega divided by k. Say it slowly. Nu equals omega over k. That means the travel speed of a pattern is the time rate divided by the spatial patterning. And now we apply the demotion rule. Energy is tele only. Energy is not a thing, not a substance, not a cause. Energy is bookkeeping. A ledger summarizing coherence constraints across omega, k, and nu inside the declared window. If the ledger stabilizes, the rule is usable there. If the ledger refuses to reconcile across legitimate representations, that mismatch is boundary information, the frontier speaking. Already you can hear why a firewall is necessary. With a language this powerful, you could speak in a hypnotic way about energy and fields and emergence and convince people you have explained everything, while you have actually done nothing but change tone. The firewall is the discipline that refuses tone as evidence. Now we come to the philosophical heart, the deep breath. The firewall is the light of Holophase science because it protects truth from becoming propaganda. It is the torch because it guides us toward the frontier without letting us worship the frontier as mystery. It is the backbone because it keeps the whole method upright under the weight of unification. Think of a torch in a mountain pass. In daylight, you can walk without thinking. At night, the same pass becomes dangerous, not because the rocks changed, but because your confidence outruns your perception. A torch does not stop you walking. It simply prevents you from stepping into air. Holophase is a mountain pass for human knowledge. It offers a route between separated valleys. Physics, chemistry, biology, cognition, cosmology, information. But that route is steep, and it is easy to fall if you let elegance replace license. So the firewall is not an aesthetic preference. It is a safety standard. Now, what does license mean in this new method? A license is a certificate that a constraint on phi patterns has survived the firewall gates inside the declared scope, with declared uncertainty. A license is not glory. A license is a tool label. It tells you where a rule is safe to use and where it is not safe to proclaim. A license always carries three handles, because reality is triunity. There is an omega handle, the timescale, the duration, the cadence you are talking about. There is a K handle, the spatial scale, the arrangement, the pattern resolution you assume. There is a nu handle, the motion regime, the coupling strength, the rate at which patterns propagate. This is why scope is sacred in Holophase science. Scope is not a footnote. Scope is a moral equivalent of a seatbelt, except it is not moral, it is engineering. It prevents the crash that happens when you apply a rule outside its tested regime. Here is how scope hides in daily life. When someone says this road is safe, they usually mean safe in daylight, in dry weather, at normal speed. If they forget those conditions, they are not giving you knowledge. They are giving you a mood. The firewall trains us to replace mood claims with scoped claims. So we practice this. Say the rule, then say the scope in one breath. This constraint on phi holds in this window, over these seconds, across this spatial domain, in this propagation regime. If you cannot say the scope, you do not yet have a license statement. Now we add uncertainty. Uncertainty is not ignorance, it is a measurement signature. Every tool has resolution limits, noise, drift, bias, and finite sampling. So uncertainty is the honest shadow your tool casts. Treat uncertainty like the blur in your eyesight when you remove your glasses. You can still see, but you must not pretend you are seeing fine print. If you do, you will misread, and you will blame the world for your own overconfidence. In the firewall, uncertainty is tracked not to embarrass us, but to protect us. It protects the kernel from being used as propaganda. It protects the public from false certainty. It protects researchers from self-deception. And it protects the frontier, because frontiers are often discovered by stubborn uncertainty that refuses to shrink. Now we add falsification, because without falsification, a rule is mythology. Falsification means you must say what observation would break the rule, weaken it, or force a license action. A rule that cannot be broken cannot be trusted because it cannot be audited. But the firewall is not naive. Falsification is not one experiment and done. It is a disciplined attack on your own claim. Test it in different conditions, try to break it, invite other people to break it, and treat failure as information rather than shame. Then comes variation. If a rule is real, it should survive controlled changes in conditions within its claimed scope. If it collapses under mild variation, then the scope was exaggerated. Then comes independence. Independent measurement paths, independent pipelines, independent instruments should converge on the same omega k nu reconstruction within declared uncertainty. If only one path produces the effect, you have a candidate, not a kernel rule. And then comes scope discipline again. Because the most common crime in science is not lying, it is scope smuggling. It is the move from in this experiment to in general, from in this window to in the universe. The firewall exists to stop that move. Now I will give you the firewall loop, spoken as a maintenance routine. Imagine you are maintaining a machine, and if you skip steps, the machine fails. This is the Holophase method. Step 1. Propose a constraint on phi patterns. Step 2. Reconstruct omega, k, and nu jointly from phi data inside the declared window. Step 3. Declare scope explicitly in omega scale, k scale, and nu regime. Step 4. Track uncertainty explicitly and propagate it to derived quantities like nu. Step 5. Test falsification. Try to break the rule. Step 6. Test variation. Change conditions and see if it survives. Step 7. Test independence. Verify with different instruments and pipelines. Step 8. If it survives, issue a license, valid in window W with uncertainty U. Step 9. Archive the shadow. Record anomalies, failures, near misses. Step 10. Maintain and evolve. Tighten, narrow, downgrade, or retire as new data arrives. That loop is the firewall as forge. It produces knowledge you can trust, not because it is comforting, but because it is audited. Now, what does the eternal frontier mean inside this method? Most people imagine a frontier as a line. On this side, knowledge. On that side, mystery. But the frontier we mean is not a wall. It is an edge created by the act of validation itself. Each time we license a rule, we do two things at once. We strengthen a kernel, and we reveal the boundary of that kernel. So the frontier is eternal because reality is richer than any single licensed grammar, and because our own success keeps generating new edges of honesty. In Holophase terms, the frontier is where our present admissible constraints on phi cannot reconstruct omega, k, and nu together with stable coherence inside one scope. It is where the triunity cannot be jointly locked without trade-offs the current grammar cannot resolve. The frontier is not shame. It is the map edge where the license ends. This is why the firewall is a compass, not a wall. Exploration is allowed everywhere. Proclamation is licensed only inside tested scope. Human beings never stop being tempted by closure. Every new success tempts the mind to shout final. The firewall is the immune system that says, celebrate progress, but keep audits. Now, what does a mature holophase science look like? It looks like a living registry with three layers. First, a stable kernel. These are constraints on phi patterns that repeatedly reconstruct omega k and nu coherently within declared uncertainty and scope. Kernel knowledge is engineering grade. Second, a growing shadow archive. This is the structured memory of anomalies, edge cases, and failure modes. A shadow archive is not shame, it is intelligence. Third, mapped frontier zones. These are regions where current admissible grammars cannot jointly stabilize the triunity or cannot reconcile energy tallies across legitimate representations, or cannot shrink uncertainty despite improved measurement. A mapped frontier is a badge of epistemic honesty. If you ever meet a field that has only a kernel and no archive, be cautious. That field may be drifting into dogma. If you meet a field that denies frontiers entirely, you are not hearing science, you are hearing ideology. Now, let us speak prediction and falsification, because the firewall demands it. Prediction, tied to omega, k, and nu. Mature sciences will exhibit this three-layer structure: kernel, shadow archive, mapped frontier. And they will speak their claims with explicit scope and uncertainty. Falsification condition. If a field claims total closure, no anomaly is worth archiving, no uncertainty worth reporting, and no frontier worth mapping, the firewall predicts ideological drift. Operationally, this shows as missing scope statements, suppressed mismatches, and proclamations that outrun independent reconstruction. License action. Narrow scope if the rule still holds somewhere. Downgrade confidence if evidence weakens. Archive mismatch as structured frontier data. Retire the rule if it repeatedly fails, even in narrow windows. Now we return to the invitation, because the firewall is not only about rules. It is about people. It is about how a community remains sane. The invitation is not to believe in holophase. It is to practice holophase, to measure honestly, report what you did, what you saw, and what failed, to declare scope, say where a claim applies in omega, in k, and in nu, to track uncertainty, keep error bars visible, including on derived quantities, to respect the firewall, invite falsification and independence, to evolve the method without corrupting it, propose improvements, but keep phi closure, triunity, and energy as tally intact. What is forbidden? Claiming ownership over reality, treating the kernel as sacred doctrine, hiding anomalies to protect a story, using science as authority theater while refusing audits, smuggling new primitives to fake closure. What happens when the check fails? Claims are relabeled as unlicensed. Scopes are narrowed. Uncertainty reporting is required. Shadow archives are reopened. And the community learns publicly without shame. Now, you asked for engagement, so let me give you a short set of analogies that leave quickly after doing their job. Cooking teaches scope. A reckless recipe says 10 minutes, as if all stoves are the same. A disciplined recipe says until the onions turn translucent, because it knows conditions vary. That is scope discipline. Medicine teaches uncertainty. A reckless voice says cures everything. A disciplined voice says helps this condition for these people at this dose with these risks. That is uncertainty plus shadow archive. Navigation teaches independence. A phone map can insist on a route even when the bridge is out. A compass and landmarks correct the phone. That is independent reconstruction. And now, one Afghanistan image, used only to clarify. No politics, only geography. Picture a river born from snow in the mountains. In spring, it swells and braids into shifting channels. In late summer, it thins and reveals stepping stones. A crossing that is safe at dawn can become dangerous by dusk. A responsible guide does not say, the crossing is always safe. The guide says, safe under these conditions, and points to signs, water speed, depth, color, and bank softness. That is the firewall in human form. Now let me make the biggest point explicit, because this is the foundation of a new Holophase science. Holophase science is not defined by the claim phi is fundamental alone. It is defined by the disciplined method by which that claim is explored, corrected, scoped, and kept honest. The firewall is that method. Without it, Holophase would become a metaphysical worldview, and the word phi would become an idol. With it, Holophase becomes a living language of measurement and constraint. So yes, Holophase science must be conducted in this firewall framework because the firewall is the only structure strong enough to hold unification without letting it rot into ideology. The firewall is the reason we can step toward cosmogenesis later without turning cosmogenesis into myth. The firewall is the reason we can unify without tyrannizing. The firewall is the reason the language stays alive. We state the axioms again because these are the steel beams. Rules do not become real by elegance, consensus, or tradition. They earn a license only by surviving falsification, variation, independence, and scope discipline. When a rule fails, we do not believe harder. We tighten, downgrade, or retire its license. Now the bridge forward. Episode 11 does not end inquiry. It makes inquiry safe. It teaches you how to participate without claiming ownership over reality. And it leaves you with one mature posture: confidence in the kernel, honesty about the shadow, courage at the frontier. One small note for clarity, spoken quickly so it does not distract you. When we say motion, or the kinematic dimension, we use the symbol nu, spelled NU, rather than the letter V. Earlier in our journey, we sometimes said V. Nu helps the ear because it sounds distinct from V, which can be confused in fast narration. And it keeps our symbols aligned. Omega for time, K for space, Nu for motion. The meaning does not change. Only the label becomes cleaner. I might slip once or twice later, but now you know why we chose Nu, and you will always hear what we mean. Keep that in mind, then return immediately to the main theme: disciplined, licensed inquiry. Before we close, feel why this firewall is the backbone of a new science. Imagine you are forging a blade. If you only love the shine, you produce decoration. If you love the edge, you must love the heat, the hammering, the repeated testing, and the willingness to throw away a blade that looks beautiful but bends under stress. Holophase science without the firewall would produce beautiful blades that bend the first time reality pushes back. The firewall is the furnace and the test bench. And notice something subtle. The firewall protects wonder. False certainty destroys wonder because it turns mystery into arrogance. Honest limits preserve wonder because they keep the universe larger than our current grammar. The firewall gives you the brave humility that can say, here is what we know, and here is what we do not yet know. And here is exactly what would change our mind. This is why the firewall is a torch. A torch does not deny darkness. It gives you a way to walk inside it. Every license is a lit step. Every scope statement is a warning sign at a cliff. Every uncertainty bound is a guardrail that keeps you from falling into theater. Every falsifier is the emergency exit that prevents a bad rule from trapping a community. Because Holophase is a language, we must also speak about interpretation. Interpretation is where sciences are quietly corrupted. A narrow result is inflated into a cosmic story. The firewall forbids inflation. It demands an interpreter's discipline. Translate without adding primitives, and simplify without removing conditions. In audio terms, carry the safety label forward. First, here is the kernel rule, stated simply. Second, here is the scope, omega scale, K scale, nu regime. Third, here is the uncertainty, and here is the observation that would force a license change. If you keep those 3 sentences, you can speak beautifully without becoming a myth maker. And one last operational habit, the audit. From time to time, the community rechecks its kernel rules with independent pipelines, retests falsifiers, and reconfirms scope. If a rule survives, the license tightens. If it fails, the license narrows, downgrades, or retires. In both cases, trust increases because reality, not pride, remains the judge. So when we say episode 11 does not end inquiry, it makes inquiry safe, we mean the method is now strong enough to carry grand synthesis without turning into a religion. We can walk toward cosmogenesis later, not as myth writers, but as disciplined reconstructors of phi patterns under license. Hold this final image. The river in the mountains. The river is always moving, always reshaping, always richer than yesterday's map. The wise guide updates the map, marks safe crossings, records dangerous bends, and teaches travelers how to read the signs. That is Holophase science under the firewall. A living map, lit by a torch that never claims the valley is finished. If you want to see the full mathematical derivations and exact equations behind this idea, you can search for Holophase on Zenodo. There you will find the scientific papers that this audio journey is built on. Salam, and peace be upon you.